My podcast is called Perverted Justice. It's based on Leviticus 19:15. It says, "Do not pervert justice." And the Hyde Park Baptist Church, in its efforts to protect itself and its bank account, has at every chance perverted justice over and over. When they have the opportunity to step in on my behalf, they protect my abuser.
Welcome to Perverted Justice. This is not just a story. It's a call to action for integrity and radical honesty, in spite of personal cost. Now here's your host, Shielagh Clark.
Welcome back to Perverted Justice. This is episode 11. It was all set. All the pieces were in place. The date was set. We were ready to go. He was scheduled to plead guilty in open court. He wasn't going to face much of a consequence, but he was finally going to be forced to admit that he had sexually abused a child. I had waited 20 years. It was finally at my fingertips, and then the church handed him exactly what he needed to escape. We left off in early fall of 2020, back in March. We were talking about the church's answer to the lawsuit. They blamed me for being abused, and then the pastor compounded that by comparing my abuse to Samson and Delilah, and then suggested that it could have been different if Weaver had simply said no to me, the way Joseph said no to Potiphar's wife. And I think you're going to pick up on a theme here. When you think we've finally reached the bottom of the barrel and there is no possible way for them to do something any worse, they come up with something else. And it just keeps getting worse. So I am a little bit nervous about this episode because this process was so unbelievably difficult for me in ways that I think it would be impossible to capture with words. And also, there are extremely raw emotions that I simply do not want to hand to my abuser in this public forum. I have no idea if he's listening, but I'm just not going to give him the satisfaction of hearing those things. So while I would be willing to discuss probably all of this privately if it were helpful to another survivor, there are some things I'm going to hold back on in this space. So I decided I'm really going to offer probably very little commentary in this episode, and I'm just going to let you listen for yourselves to some of the important clips from recordings of meetings I had with the solicitor. I'll try to pop in and translate if there are any pieces that I feel like are super hard to understand, but I want you to hear it from her mouth so that you can hear that I'm not making this stuff up. This is reality. This is what happened. So the solicitor reached out to me sometime, I think in October, to begin discussions about the prosecution. This is October of 2020. We met a handful of times, and while she admitted that she felt jail time was appropriate in this case, his Parkinson's in the middle of a pandemic was going to make that impossible. So that was completely off the table. So I'm going to go ahead and start with, I think this is actually the second meeting I had with her, but I don't have a recording of the first.
So I wanted to talk to you about that. We did make the prior incident report available. I think that is actually super relevant and helpful. It just lays out for the defense attorney, who obviously wasn't around in 2005, that you have already made this statement, you've made this claim, you made this same statement. When I reread the whole thing, it is very clear you give a very detailed account of what happened. So for us, it's just basically you're making the same statement over and over and over, and there's really no deviating, which is really helpful for us.
So she's just explaining to me some of the evidence that she turned over for the defense to look at. Obviously, he has a right to have access to anything that's going to be used against him. So she's just kind of laying out for me what she did and did not provide based on whether or not she felt it was relevant.
So we've talked about the offer. He obviously has a different opinion. He's going to talk to Mr. Weaver, his client, and then I told him if he had something you want to talk about, be happy to hear from him. We made the offer of HIP with sex offender registry. He obviously doesn't think registry is appropriate and wants to argue about not being on the registry. This is not a registry mandatory offense. I think we've talked about that already.
She's talking about the offer that we discussed in the first meeting, where we had discussed that jail was just not going to be an option with a immunocompromised person in the middle of a global pandemic. And she requested HIP, which is home incarceration, and sex offender registry. And she's just telling me that she sent that offer to him. His attorney thinks that registry is not appropriate. And she's also clarifying here that what he's being charged for is not an offense that's a mandatory registration offense. So we can argue for it, but they can argue against it. I just want to clarify, I was 1 month too old for him to be charged with a registration mandatory offense. If this had happened 1 month earlier, he would have been mandated to be on the registry. The age of consent in South Carolina is 16. And I had turned 16 at the end of February. This is the beginning of April when the crimes that he's being charged for occurred.
What are the chances that we come to some sort of agreement that involves nothing?
What do you mean?
Like if you can't go to jail and they argue no registry, then what?
Then he gets a conviction on his record, and the judge could potentially give him HIP or probation.
Hopefully you heard that. I'm just going to translate. I asked what's the likelihood that we reach an agreement that basically has zero consequence for him. And she explained that that might mean that he just has a conviction on his record, and maybe the judge would give him home incarceration, and maybe the judge would give him probation.
The offer, I've talked to his attorney about the offer. I told him I'm pretty firm on the fact that I think we're going to argue for registry. I'm not taking that off the table. I think it's appropriate, especially given that he was a pastor. He used his position of authority as a way to manipulate you and other people to get what he wanted, and I think registry is appropriate. They can argue.
She's just saying that she thinks that registration, him being on the registry, is very important based on the fact that he used his power as pastor to manipulate and get what he wanted. And then just further explaining that they can argue against it because it's not mandatory for this offense.
I found out last week that his current church, who knows all about whatever, has been letting him work in the children's musicals. His wife is always present, but I don't really think that makes much of a difference.
Yeah.
Someone from his church contacted me. Apparently Lisa, his wife, wrote a letter that the pastor read in an evening service shortly after he was arrested that basically gave no information, just said he was arrested and we're all sinners and need forgiveness. And so nobody, I guess, really cares to find out why he was arrested. He just has to deal with some consequences from the bad decision he made. And so she decided to go looking and found the article and found me. And she's not okay. She was really angry because her kids took piano lessons from his wife, and they were in his house, and she had no idea, but the church has known all this time, and so she's pretty upset about it. She thinks that the parents should have been told, and that the pastor doesn't have a right to put their children at risk without their consent.
Okay, just to summarize, I had a couple of people from Weaver's church reach out to me. I had a couple follow me on social media, And this particular woman had an abuse history of her own. And so she went digging to see why Weaver was actually arrested, and discovered me, followed me for a while on social media, and then she reached out. And we had a couple of extended conversations. And she was just very angry because her children had been taking piano lessons from Lisa in their home. And she was upset that she didn't have this information. And I just want to talk real quick. The solicitor is going to get into the failure of churches in just a second, but I just want to specifically talk about the failure of the people who restored Jonathan Weaver after this incident in 2005. He went back home to the seminary where he graduated from, and they placed him and his family into, I think it's called Faith Baptist, in Lebanon under Wayne Burgraff to restore them and help them put their family back together. And nothing about the actual truth was important to these people at all. Jeff Tuttle knew the truth. Charles McLean knew the truth. And they were instrumental, Charles McLean especially, but also Jeff Tuttle, instrumental in moving Weaver, putting him and his family into this church, and being quiet about what actually happened. And like I said a little bit earlier, he and his wife worked with the children's musicals, and he had interaction with children that was condoned by the church. And then when this all happened, when he was arrested, the appropriate response for that church would have been to tell the whole truth and then invite potential victims to come forward and be supported. They should have recognized their failure at that time, and they should have been open to hearing from and then supporting potential victims. But they didn't do that. They let Lisa write a letter that minimized, like downplayed it to the degree that everyone who has contacted me has said things like, we just assumed he did something before he was saved. We didn't even know he used to be a pastor. This woman, she said it just made it sound like he had done something relatively insignificant, and it's all over and said and done, and it's nothing. There's nothing to see here. Look the other way. And she actually expressed to me feeling some kind of guilt over having been nosy enough to go and find out the truth. And that's the weird spiritual power that these places hold over people. Like, these are her own children that have been needlessly exposed because of the failure of the pastor, but she felt wrong for having discovered it on her own. Anyway, I'm going to keep going here.
Julie can attest to this, but until you have been part of this world, people just don't understand them. They don't. And we're trying to educate them. Julie Valentine's Center does a great job. They put on a conference, and it's specifically to churches and clergy on how faith, it's called How Faith Hurts. It's a conference for churches to understand the role that they also play in protecting child predators. And by pretending it's not happening, or by ignoring the signs, or by not having honest conversations and not using the terminology they should, they're doing their part, and they're really trying to educate at least our area about this. And I'm really involved in my church, and I try to educate them. And there was the prior solicitor who worked here, whose caseload I took. She's also at our church. Julie's really involved in her church. We feel strongly about it. And I feel strongly about that in particular, that people just, I don't know if they don't want to know or they don't care to know. I don't really know what the issue is. But
believing that somebody that they know and trust could be capable of something like that is,
people really struggle
they
with
don't
that.
want that to be the case, so they won't look the other way.
People, that is,
Plus, the whole forgiveness thing compounds the problem because we think, well, we can forgive them and move on and just pretend it never happened, like that fixes somebody.
Okay, so that was a solicitor who, by the way, my case was handled in the Crimes Against Children department. Okay, so this woman handles crimes against children on a regular basis. And this is her explaining that she recognizes that churches play a big role in protecting child predators. It's not just me saying this. She is explaining the work that the Julie Valentine Center is doing in my area to try to educate churches on the things that they're doing that are protecting child predators. She mentions that a couple of the solicitors and my victim advocate are all in churches in the Greenville area and trying to work to educate churches because it's such a big problem. Oh, and I said that the forgiveness issue compounds the problem because people think, well, they said they were sorry, we can just forgive them and move on, like that fixes a person. And that just isn't the case. People who have this propensity are dangerous to children. End of story.
you've told this story for years, and it's clearly been very repetitive and accurate. You don't deviate from the facts. You have a very detailed and meticulous memory from what I can gather from everything you've written down and even from watching the interview. And you have a really strong story and a strong statement. And, if he ever does see the full timeline that you did, he should know how this impacted you and what a terrible person he was and has been.
Just for clarity, she's talking about the timeline I told you I put together. Only the first 2 pages of it were submitted as evidence because only the first 2 pages were relevant to this particular crime. But the rest of it, I don't know how many pages it is, several, he has never seen. It was withheld, and I'm glad for that at this point, but I might change my opinion sometime.
And if nothing else, that will show him. And I really hope his wife one day will have the opportunity to see it and feel sorry for how she has reacted to the whole thing. I mean, I'm sure there have been signs for her, but I can't imagine what their marriage has been like either. And that she's protected him and covered for him is bothersome as well.
Okay, so that's the end of the second meeting with the solicitor. And I basically went home to wait, which was excruciating. But this recording here begins the next meeting with the solicitor after she had heard back from Weaver's attorney about our offer.
So I heard back from the defense attorney yesterday, and he counter offered me with an A and B second in probation. We had offered A and B first, and I did speak with our home incarceration program, and they can't supervise him in Pennsylvania, which is part of the issue. That's a whole big issue about if he violated, they wouldn't be able to just go get him. They'd have to do a dual court jurisdiction and a lot of logistical things that just aren't possible right now with COVID.
Okay, so that last bit was about how home incarceration wouldn't be able to monitor him in Pennsylvania. If he violated, they couldn't go pick him up, and COVID was going to complicate the dual jurisdiction. Everything just got stupid with COVID, which really limited what was available for us. But before that, she said that we had offered A and B first, which is assault and battery, first degree, which is a felony, which is what he was initially charged with when he was arrested. Okay, he was charged with 2 counts of that. And so she had offered A and B first with registration. The attorney countered A and B second, which is a misdemeanor. A and B first carried up to 10 years. A and B second was only 1 to 3 years. Or 0 to 3 years, and no registration, but yes to probation, and no home incarceration.
So I told him I was going to talk to you about it and then I'd get back with him. I know that you had emailed Julie and said that he got served with some sort of notification. I guess the church is going to try to go after him. So I was surprised to hear that he would even be interested in taking a plea at this point.
Okay, so this is the thing. This is November of 2020, and before I came to this meeting, I found out that the church decided to sue Jonathan. And as the solicitor is explaining, she's surprised that he's even entertaining the possibility of pleading guilty, because we all know that when you plead guilty in a criminal case, that can be used against you in a civil case. And here's the thing: when the perpetrator pleads guilty to a criminal act, the institution is harmed by that in their defense in a civil case, not just the perpetrator. So you have to understand that this was a strategic move. But in November, the church sued Jonathan Weaver, and that led to a disruption in the criminal proceedings.
And your opinion is that we should run with this because it's better than going to trial?
My honest opinion is yes. Say that for a few reasons. One, the court shut back down again last week.
I asked if her opinion was that we should accept this counteroffer because it was better than going to trial, and she said yes for a couple of reasons. Court shut down again last week.
I think him accepting guilt and getting a conviction on his record is a big deal, and I think he has denied it for so long that it would bring you a little bit of closure, not nearly what you deserve. But
So she said there's 45 or 50 trials at least that are going to be backlogged by the time the court opens back up, which could push us as far as 4 years out if we actually wanted to pursue a trial. And then she just said that a guilty plea is very important, and that, he's denied this for so long that him having to come in and plead guilty would offer some kind of closure, even though it's not nearly what I actually deserve.
at least him having to admit that he did something and have something on his record would bring you some sort of closure in some regard. No, it's not near what you deserve, and there's no justice for what he's done. But that's my opinion. I think if he pleads guilty and we know that it's going to be conviction, that you at least get to come in and tell the judge what it's done for you and how you feel and how this has affected you, and he would at least get to hear that.
She just said accepting the offer would guarantee a conviction, and I would be able to come in and tell the judge how this has affected me long term, and Weaver would have to sit and listen to me tell that.
And then he would have a conviction. So whatever church he's at and they're allowing him to do whatever they're allowing him to do would at least be put on notice that he's admitted guilt to doing something he shouldn't be. And an assault and battery on his record is, an assault and battery. Like, it doesn't come off, and it's clear that there has been some sort of inappropriate touching.
Second Amendment.
So she basically just said that assault and battery doesn't ever come off your record. It's not expungible. And that a guilty plea would also put the church on notice where he is, that he's pled guilty to this, and that they need to take appropriate steps to protect the children in their church.
It's 0 to 3, so it's not an expungible offense. And obviously we're here because we know it happened. You deserve justice. You deserve better than this. I'm sorry that I can't provide you with a better outcome at this point.
She just said, obviously we're here because we know that this happened and you deserve justice, and she's sorry that she can't offer me something better than this at this point.
Obviously it's not a done deal and he hasn't signed anything, but based on my emails with his attorney, I think he is willing to do that. And I could have to call you and say they've changed their minds. I hope that's not the case. But as of today, that is what I am understanding from his attorney on the 3 emails we've exchanged.
Okay, I don't know how much of that you could understand. Basically, she's just reiterating how important this guilty plea is and how substantial it is in the void here surrounding the concept of justice. That there really is not justice for me in this situation because of several factors. But getting him to come in and plead guilty is a huge thing. And I expressed there that I really just want this to be over. The wait was agonizing. And it felt like every time I was settling myself down and kind of getting into a new rhythm of waiting and being okay with waiting, then something would shift. And I just felt like I was being jerked around by the neck. I was constantly just getting upset and then calming down and getting super upset and calming down. It was just not a healthy cycle for me. And it just felt like these meetings were just spaced out just far enough that they were completely disrupting my life. And then at the same time, I mean, I was feeling really conflicted about the punishment because I felt in a big way like the punishment should fit the crime. And that people think that the punishment should fit the crime. And so if he gets a slap on the wrist, it felt like that was an indication that that's all he deserved. And the conflict was that I also didn't want him to go to jail because I was afraid. You know, I've heard what child predators get, you know, how they're treated by other inmates in jail. And I really did not want him to go and have something happen to him and then feel for my whole life like that was my fault. So it's just feeling very conflicted about this tug of war, I guess, between what he deserved technically and what I really actually wanted to have happen. And more than anything, I just wanted the truth told. That's been my goal from the beginning. And so the guilty plea was very important. The conviction was very important. But the fact that he wasn't going to actually be punished was also a sting. And then, as we'll get into a little bit later, the thing that really started to bother me after this meeting was the amount of power that he had in deciding what happened. Just this, oh, we'll offer him this, and well, maybe he'll take it or maybe he won't. And nobody really wants to go to trial, but it's just this game of posturing back and forth. Well, who's gonna cave first and decide to take the deal, the current deal, the other side's deal, instead of having to go to trial, right? And while I fully understand the justice system and I understand all of the protections that an accused person has and why they have them and how important that is, it also feels, the process feels incredibly unjust. So we have the greatest justice system in the world, and also it has some problems. I mean, the plea deals are ridiculous in my opinion. I get that they're a protection. They expedite things, but I think that they also betray justice at the same time.
I heard from my attorney in New York yesterday, and she said that they haven't actually answered yet, and they're trying to find out if they can get him covered under the church's insurance policy so he doesn't need private counsel.
That's what his attorney's trying to figure out.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if that's going to have an effect on whether or not they change their mind.
Okay, so that's me predicting the future. His attorney had contacted mine asking about the insurance policy. And as their employee, the church was going to have to indemnify him. And he was going to have the same protection or coverage under the insurance policy as the church had. And of course the church was arguing that he deviated from his official role in order to do these things, if he did them at all. But the point is that Weaver and his attorney were playing chess. They were willing to plead guilty as long as it wasn't also going to put the final nail in the coffin for the civil suit. So they were playing both games at the same time and waiting till the last second to move the final piece.
He's gonna take it and spin it however he wants.
It doesn't matter how he spends it. It doesn't. I mean, he can tell everybody that he's just doing this to get it over with. It didn't actually happen. It doesn't matter what he says.
This is, again, my conflict over this whole idea of a plea agreement versus going to trial. And I understand the risks of going to trial. But when someone has the power to negotiate and decide what happens to them, then they also get to just spin. If they don't actually get the evidence presented to a jury of their peers and get convicted, then they end up with the power to say, well, I just did it to save my family from the heartache of a trial, or I just did it for, whatever reason. They get to spin it and lessen its effect in their daily lives. It's not the same as being convicted.
If he comes in and pleads guilty, that is all everyone needs to know. He can say whatever he wants, but everybody that knows that he pled guilty will know there's a reason he pled guilty, because he's more afraid of the outcome of what would happen if he didn't. What he says or what he perceives or what he tries to tell other people doesn't matter. It doesn't. You know what happened. And the people that love you and care about you know what happened, and God knows what happened, and he's going to answer to him one day. It doesn't matter what he tells people, because if he comes in and pleads guilty, he believes that there's enough evidence for him to think that what would happen to him would be worse if he didn't.
She's basically explaining all of the reasons why a guilty plea is so important, and how it, in her opinion, negates all of the spin. I don't know if that's 100% true, but I do know that pleading guilty was definitely way better than what he actually did. We'll get to that in a minute. But again, please understand, this is what the church stole from me. They stole the only bit of justice that I had left to get. They took it because it was better for them financially. Okay, so we're into January now. This is the final in-person meeting that I had with the solicitor. I did have another meeting by phone that I don't have a recording of, but I wish that I did. But we're into January, so some things have happened, and I brought Pat with me to this meeting because I was very, very upset. I was not coping well at all with the amount of power that I felt like he had in this situation.
And I discussed the previous offer, and also in realizing that this happened in 2001, the law enforcement officer could have actually charged with a different statute, which is our old Abhan statute. And I think that is the more appropriate thing for him to plead under. So the old Abhan statute is indecent liberties with a female.
Okay, so she's explaining that the law changed in 2010. This incident happened in 2001. So in 2001, it wouldn't have been assault and battery first or second. It would have been Abhan, assault and battery of a high and aggravated nature, indecent liberties with a female. I don't know if it's like a subtitle or what. I don't know how that works. But she's saying that when someone gets charged with an old crime, they should be charged under the old statute. And so this is what he should have been charged with to begin with. And so now they were taking A and B first and A and B second off the table and switching him to Abhan.
And it's 0 to 10 years, which is basically the equivalent of the A and B first. He's been charged with the thing that you won't like about it, but it's a misdemeanor. It's still not a felony. And federally, because it's up to 10 years, it's a felony for a federal purpose, like owning a firearm and whatnot. You can't do that.
Okay, so she said Abhan is a misdemeanor, just like A and B second, but unlike A and B second, it wasn't 0 to 3 anymore, it was back to 0 to 10. So it acts like a felony for federal purposes. She mentioned there that I wasn't going to like it. And one of the things that I was having a problem with the counteroffer was that they had gone from A and B first to A and B second, which took him from felony conviction to misdemeanor conviction. And so then anyways, they put this other statute as the official charge, and that still was not a felony.
We kind of slice it and dice it. It's either a judge only lets us talk about these two things that happened 20 years ago, or we let in everything, and there is no telling what a jury, especially with people we don't know, are going to say or think. I know this happened. I believe you. You brought all this documentation and clearly you hung on to it for a reason. Like, I know this happened. I can only do so much though with what I have. And I think getting a conviction is a big deal. I mean, realistically, his attorney has asked me to send him to PTI. And I don't think that's appropriate.
To do what?
Send him to PTI.
What is that?
No conviction, no nothing. You do some community service. So
Aren't you friends with this dude?
So she's still trying to convince me that I have power here because I'm forcing him to admit guilt. I'm forcing him to come in and finally tell the truth after 20 years of lying. She's telling me that it wouldn't be as easy to prove as I think that it would be. And I didn't go into this thinking that it was going to be easy to prove. I think she's wrong in that assumption. And she's not quite understanding what I'm actually upset about. But she is reiterating over and over again that she believes me, that obviously, like, the evidence is very clear that this did happen. And then she told me that his attorney wanted to just drop the charges altogether and give him a little bit of community service and send him on his way. And that made me very upset.
How do you work here and know his side of it and then go out there and do what he's doing? That's gross.
I just asked how he can be on this side. He can advocate for victims of crimes and then go make his money by trying to get criminals off with no consequence. And she told me it's just his job.
Sheila's his job.
I didn't have to pick it.
I'm here. I advocate. I could leave and go do something else, but I don't. I choose to be here.
I know. I see that. I have a hard time believing that you would go out there and advocate for someone who hurt a kid.
I would not. You're right. I would never do that. I don't have that in me.
And please don't misunderstand. I know that people have a right to defense, that they are innocent under the law until they are convicted, until they are proven guilty. I get it. And also, I think it's gross that there are people who make a ton of money defending people who are actually guilty.
Shielagh, I believe you. I know this happened. It's just proving it is much more difficult than it appears on its face. And it's beyond a reasonable doubt. And for a jury, and convincing 12 people to find 10 guilty, if we can only talk about this in a bubble, could be very hard. And it only takes one person to say, I'm not sure. I think something happened, but I don't know, for it to all fall apart. And I understand it's frustrating. I understand that it is. You know,
Is it the punishment that's frustrating?
I'm sorry.
Not the punishment that's frustrating. It's the fact that his words will always carry more weight than mine.
I was telling her that it's not the punishment that's frustrating to me. It's not what's happening to him that's frustrating to me. It's the fact that he has the power to decide so much, and that he has an actual living, breathing human being fighting for him to suffer no consequence. It's not about what he's suffering. It's about the fact that he has the power to decide.
Shielagh, pleading guilty means he's acknowledging guilt. I'm not sure where we're not on the same page on this.
She's still not understanding what the problem is. And she's getting frustrated that we're not on the same page, that I am not jumping up and down excited.
Shielagh, he's going to have to accept responsibility in court. He's going to have to tell the judge he is guilty of what she reads into the record.
This is my victim advocate speaking. Her name is Julie, and she's been sitting there the whole time.
It will say that in 2001, when you were 16, you were here for a college visit to Bob Jones with your pastor and some other students. And he had you come across the street, and he placed his body on top of yours and asked you, I'm probably not going to put the exact words because that was confusing, about him asking you if you could feel his orgasm. No, that was just very confusing. But asking you if you could feel his private parts, and giving you a back massage unwanted, and then the next day having you come back to the same apartment where he then was licking your private part.
And he's going to have to admit to doing that.
I have to admit to telling me that it was my fault.
I asked, is he going to have to admit to telling me that it was my fault?
I mean, I can certainly add that in there.
Okay, I just need to add in here, because this seems to be a problem with some people, or for some people. I am not exaggerating in the slightest bit when I tell you that at 16 years old, I had absolutely no idea what sex was. I was very sheltered. I was homeschooled. I went back into public school in 8th grade, but my mother wrote notes to excuse me from health class during the reproductive health section. And I went and I sat in the library blissfully unaware. And that might have been fine if she had made up the difference at home, but she didn't. I had no idea.
So I really experienced this much like a younger child would have. Like, just the fact that I'm being sexually assaulted by my pastor is hard enough, shocking enough, but that I had no idea that people do these things to each other. Like, the whole thing was shocking and terrifying to me. So people try to suggest that I had something to do with, that I caused this, that I wanted this. I'm glad for them that they have no idea what it was like to experience this.
And honestly, him pleading now that he's been served with civil papers is even more of a big deal, because if he admits guilt here, the likelihood that they will use that against him is much higher. So I'm surprised that he's going to even do that with the civil suit pending with him as the named party now.
That's the solicitor telling you exactly what's going to happen. She might not know it, but that's from her mouth, so that you understand that I'm not making this up. Adding him to the civil suit is what is going to give him his get-out-of-jail-free card.
And it's guaranteed he's going to plead guilty?
He could change his mind, but I think based on my conversations with his attorney, that we could probably say that it's going to happen.
She said that she thinks, based on the conversations with his attorney, that we can probably say that this is going to happen. It's not guaranteed, and it's not any papers yet, so it could change. So at the time of this meeting, there was a motion to dismiss pending. Weaver secured himself an attorney in New York State. They filed a motion to dismiss, and it was still pending. A decision wasn't reached until after his conviction on that. I'll talk more about this later. This episode is getting really long. So anyway, he was all set. Everything was set. He was going to plead guilty. I showed up for court, go into the courtroom, and his attorney announces that he is pleading Alford. Alford is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But basically, he's maintaining his innocence while accepting that the state has enough evidence to convict him. So he is still, even in his technically guilty plea, maintaining his innocence. This is like everything that I was afraid of in this whole process, was that he was going to get to spin it. And that is exactly what he got. He got to lie again. And it's true. He had to admit that the state has enough evidence against him. It's true that I got a conviction when so many people don't. But I almost got a straight up guilty plea. And I would have gotten that if the Hyde Park Baptist Church had been less concerned about their bank account and more concerned with me and my well-being, about the meting out of justice. My podcast is called Perverted Justice. It's based on Leviticus 19:15. It says, "Do not pervert justice." And the Hyde Park Baptist Church, in its efforts to protect itself and its bank account, has at every chance perverted justice over and over. When they have the opportunity to step in on my behalf, they protect my abuser. It happened in 2005, which we'll get into when I talk about the abuse. And now we have this do-over, a second chance. And they protected him again. And I can reframe this all day long and tell myself I won. I mean, I did. He had to come in, he had to face this, right? He got public exposure, worldwide exposure from the Bob Jones article. In a lot of ways, I did win. But the church stole something very important, because their money is what's important to them. And not only that, one of the main arguments against me is that I use the civil justice system. Christians aren't supposed to do that. And what did they do? They used the civil justice system. They sued Weaver to protect themselves. And I need to add here, in 2022, I sat down with Dale and Alex. I've mentioned that before. And they claimed at that meeting that they had no idea that their attorney did this. I don't believe that. It was their duty to know. I think that one person definitely knew. Maybe two, but I think one person definitely knew and didn't tell anybody else. And in that meeting, Alex told me, arguing about the fact that he broke confidentiality in order to read that letter to the congregation and make it look like I was suing them for millions of dollars, right? And he said that he had a duty to keep the church informed. And as of at least a month ago, Alex has not informed the church that the church sued Jonathan Weaver. So if it's actually his duty, and he didn't know in 2022 that the church had sued Jonathan, robbed me of the justice that I deserved, protected themselves with that lawsuit, and then gave Weaver access to all of my private medical records, my therapy records, my private messaging, just handed access to that to my abuser.
If he really thinks that it's his obligation and his duty to keep the church informed, then why did he keep that a secret for 3 more years? And just the fact that they did that, Dale and Alex did not go and tell the church that this happened if they really didn't know beforehand. And now in 2022, they're finding out that this happened. Why did they not run to the church and update them? In another episode, I don't have time today, but in another episode, I will go through that meeting I had with Dale and Alex, and I'll explain this a little bit better. But I wholeheartedly reject this argument that they didn't know. Alex said that he had a meeting with their attorney every week for 2 years. The whole 2 years, the whole time that this is ongoing, he's having a meeting every week with his attorney, but he doesn't know that they sued Jonathan. I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a second. Dale said he wouldn't talk to me because he was afraid of unscrupulous attorneys, but then admitted in the next breath that he has not read a single document that their attorney filed with the court. How are you going to turn over a case this important to an attorney you don't know, and then not monitor what they're actually doing and filing on your behalf, and then claim to be ethical people? I didn't know is not an excuse, especially not when they had all the access they needed to know. And they had all of the responsibility to regulate their attorney's behavior the same way that I did. I'm being called the unethical one here, the ungodly one here that needs to be turned over to Satan. But I'm the only one in this equation who has been pushing and pushing to make sure that what is done on my behalf is above board, it's honest, it's ethical, and it's true. Anyway, this has already gone on too long, so thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
If your community is dedicated to fostering a safe and supportive environment, connect with Grace, Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment, at netgrace.org. Grace's mission is to empower Christian communities to recognize, prevent, and respond to abuse effectively. They provide vital resources and training to help churches understand the complexities of abuse and adopt effective prevention policy and trauma-informed responses.